week we talked, or last week or 2 weeks ago, whenever it was, we talked about his expectations and how there's no more excuses and he's got all the weapons now. But I want to go sort of on a more quantitative take and look at some of the numbers. So obviously he was Rookie of the Year his first year. They went to the playoffs. And so wins and losses notwithstanding. Last year's numbers in 13 games, 16 touchdowns, 12 picks, 3,200 yards, 60% completion rate, 82.2 rating. Dan, the question is this. If RG3 improves across the board in those numbers, can the season be deemed a success for him, taking injuries and wins and losses out of the equation?
I mean, those are things that are so hard to take out of the equation. I think that, and this is, I know you want this to be sort of metric-based in some way, and what my response is not going to be, but I think that at the end of this season, he has to sort of clearly be in like the top 15 or 20 or 15 or 10 quarterbacks in the NFL, I think, in a way that you can look around the league and say, 2/3 of the league would love to have this guy as a starting quarterback. And I don't know what the exact number would be, but it's the fact that you gave up so much from him. You can't get away from how many picks you gave up to get this guy, how high a draft pick he was. 3 years in, the first year for sure you can, for a normal guy, you could throw away. For him, it was obviously spectacular. But I think by 3 years in, a guy that you gave up that much for, he has to clearly be a quarterback that would be better than the league average. And I would think quite a bit better than the league average. So however you want to quantify that, I think that's what I'd be looking for.
So just simply by improving it by a couple touchdowns, a couple fewer picks, a little bit more yardage, that's not enough. You think it's got to be more than that given what they gave up.
His numbers were pretty
that's
bad last year, so I think just the marginal improvements would not be enough.
Got it.
Yeah, I hate calibrating the game rather than celebrating it or
forcing you guys down to a narrow.
And I understand your point, but I don't agree, because I think I wouldn't mind worse numbers if I were a fan of this team if he won 9 games as opposed to 3. If he could come in, if he could have 3 lousy quarters and win 4 games in the fourth quarter, to me that's an elite level quarterback. And a guy that directs his team down the field when he needs it at the end, that's what makes an elite quarterback in this league, not one that necessarily puts up numbers. And so I know most of the time they go hand in hand, but I just like to see him win football games.
So winning, thanks for taking that off the way I wanted to go. Scott, can we go back to the numbers, please?
That was purposefully.
Sure. I guess the thing with the numbers is I do agree with Mike. I'll get back to the numbers, but I do agree that if he's a fantasy superstar and they go 3-13 again, I don't think you really look at that as great progress, because obviously somewhere in there he's making bad decisions. He's not doing the things that he needs to do to win more games. And something came out this week. I think it was 538 that had Andrew Luck, who you ask anybody and they would say he's certainly in the top 5 of today's quarterbacks. Forget young crop of quarterbacks, quarterbacks period. And they say, well, if you look at these numbers, he's not even in the top 10 for three different metrics. I think he can spin it different ways. I think, like Dan said, last year's numbers for RG3 were not good, and he has so many more weapons at his disposal this year. Forget about the knee being better, but if he's not throwing for 25 touchdowns and cutting down on the interceptions with Deshaun and Pierre and Andre there, I think, it is kind of a
You love calling
bust.
them by their first names.
I'm sorry.
No, that's fine. If we are talking specific numbers, I think the one to me that I would be, and I mentioned this before, the one I'd be most interested in is the turnovers.
Yeah.
It wasn't just the interceptions, it was so many lost fumbles.
Yeah.
In the first 2 years, he had a ton of fumbles. Just his first year, he happened not to lose very many of them, and that's kind of like a random statistic. But I think more than anything else, it's got to be way fewer turnovers than it was last year.
That's a good place. Let's end there on the fewer turnovers. Plenty more speculating on the numbers of Robert Griffin III, a healthy RG3 in the weeks to come.